In the ancient kingdom of Velmora, surrounded by silver rivers and towering cedar forests, there ruled a man whose name once shook the earth itself, King Darius Valemont. In his youth, Darius had conquered mountains that armies feared to cross. He had faced warlords twice his size and returned with their banners beneath his boots. His sword had carved peace into lands that knew only chaos. But now, age had begun whispering its quiet truths into his bones. And his greatest battle was no longer beyond the castle walls. It lived inside them. His son, Prince Kaelin Valemont. Kaelin was handsome, sharp-eyed, and naturally gifted. He could learn in a day what others studied for a month. But he refused effort the way a spoiled cat refuses rain. Silk robes, honeyed wine, musicians at dawn, dancers at dusk, perfumed baths, soft cushions. He adored comfort the way warriors adore victory. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the high stained glass windows, King Darius stood unseen above the courtyard balcony. Below, the prince lay sprawled on a marble bench, lazily tossing grapes into his mouth while two performers twirled for his amusement. A captain of the royal guard approached him carefully. "Your Highness," the captain bowed. "The sword masters await you." Kaelin waved a careless hand. "Tell them I am engaged in deeper training." The captain hesitated. "Deeper training, my prince?" Kaelin smirked. "Yes. I am mastering the art of relaxation." The performers giggled. From the balcony above, the king's jaw tightened. That evening, in the grand hall, Darius struck the oak table so hard that goblets trembled. "He will inherit an empire he cannot defend," he thundered. The ministers lowered their eyes. General Varric, scarred and battle-worn, spoke cautiously. "Majesty, the prince attends training. His body is present." "Yes," Darius growled. "But his mind is asleep." The court fell silent. For months, the king summoned the finest mentors in Velmora. Sword masters from the north, strategists from the eastern isles, scholars of war philosophy. Each returned defeated. "He grows bored," one said. "He lacks hunger," another admitted. "He learns quickly but abandons effort when discomfort arrives." One evening, unable to bear it any longer, King Darius marched into his son's chambers. Silk curtains swayed gently. Incense burned sweetly in golden bowls. Kaelin reclined against embroidered pillows. "Father," he sighed, "you look tired. Sit. You should rest more." The king stared at him. "Do you know what exhaustion feels like?" Darius asked quietly. Kaelin shrugged. "I assume it is unpleasant. I avoid it." The king's voice hardened. "From tomorrow, the music ends. The dancers leave. The luxuries stop." Kaelin sat upright. "You cannot be serious. I am king. You are my father." "I am both," Darius said coldly. "And I refuse to raise a fragile ruler." The next morning, the palace changed. No music. No dancers. No endless feasts. Kaelin's chambers were stripped bare except for essentials. At first, he laughed. "A temporary storm," he muttered. But by the third day, his temper burned. He refused meals. He ignored servants. He avoided his father completely. In the courtyard, he practiced half-heartedly, slashing at straw dummies with dull anger. But his strikes lacked fire. At night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling. Not because he missed the silk, but because something inside him felt restless. Uncomfortable. As if silence had exposed the noise he had been avoiding for years. The king watched from afar, heavy-hearted. He loved his son deeply. But love without strength, he believed, was a curse. And so, when the royal minister approached him one morning with unusual urgency, Darius listened carefully. "Your Majesty," the minister said softly, "there is someone you have not yet summoned." "Another sword master?" the king asked bitterly. The minister shook his head. "No. Not a master of swords. A master of men." Darius frowned. In the high desert of Arashkar, the minister continued, there lives a man called Seraphim the Ashen. The name carried weight. They say he trains not the body, but the will. The king's eyes narrowed. And they say, the minister whispered, that no one who studies under him remains weak. Darius stood slowly. Send for him. Far beyond the palace walls, across burning sands and silent dunes, a lone rider began his journey toward Velmora. And with him came change. 3 weeks later, beneath a sky heavy with dust and fading gold light, a lone rider entered the gates of Velmora. He wore no armor, no royal colors, no jeweled weapon at his hip. Only a simple ash-gray cloak, sun-worn boots, and eyes that seemed older than the kingdom itself. This was Seraphim. The guards expected a legend wrapped in steel. Instead, they saw a man who looked more like a wandering monk than a warrior. Yet no one stopped him. There was something unsettling about his stillness, as if he moved only when he chose to, not when the world demanded it. When Seraphim entered the throne hall, King Darius studied him carefully. You are Seraphim the Ashen? The king asked. I am called that. The man replied calmly. You have trained warriors? I have trained minds. Seraphim corrected gently. The court shifted uncomfortably. King Darius leaned forward. My son lacks discipline. He flees discomfort. He worships ease. Can you change him? Seraphim did not answer immediately. Instead, he asked, does your son believe he is broken? The king frowned. No. He believes he is entitled. Good. Seraphim nodded. Broken men hide. Entitled men can still be awakened. And what do you require? The king asked. 6 months, Seraphim said. Your silence. And your trust. You shall have it. Darius replied without hesitation. That afternoon, Seraphim was led to the training courtyard where Prince Kalen stood lazily spinning a practice blade. Kalen glanced up and smirked. Another instructor? You desert men multiply quickly. Seraphim did not bow. I am not here to instruct you. Kalen blinked. Then what are you here for? To observe, Seraphim said simply. Kalen scoffed. Observe what? The cage. The prince stiffened. What cage? Seraphim walked closer, circling him slowly. The invisible one. Kalen's jaw tightened. Speak clearly, old man. You are not lazy, Seraphim said calmly. You are ruled. Ruled? Kalen laughed. By whom? My father? Seraphim met his eyes. By your own cravings. The courtyard grew quiet. Kalen felt irritation rising. Not because the words were harsh, but because they felt precise. I lack nothing, the prince said sharply. Exactly, Seraphim replied. The answer lingered like smoke. Seraphim then surprised him. I agree with you. Kalen frowned. You agree? Yes. Your father was wrong to strip your comforts. The prince's posture softened slightly. Finally, he muttered. Seraphim stepped closer. You should enjoy luxury. You are a prince. Kalen smiled faintly. But, Seraphim continued, luxury should obey you, not command you. The smile faded. I propose something simple, Seraphim said. For the next month, you will not train harder. Kalen raised a brow. No, no. You will train less. The prince almost laughed. Explain. You will strike that dummy. Seraphim pointed. Exactly 10 times each morning. No more. No less. That is absurd. After that, Seraphim continued, you may return to your comforts. Kalen studied him carefully. This is your grand method? Yes. And if I refuse? Seraphim shrugged lightly. Then I will leave. And you will remain as you are. The simplicity unsettled him. There was no lecture. No pressure. No threat. Just a choice. 10 strikes, Kalen repeated. 10 perfect strikes, Seraphine corrected. The next morning, Kalen arrived reluctantly. He lifted his sword. Strike 1. Lazy. Again, Seraphine said calmly. That was 1. No. That was noise. Kalen clenched his teeth. Strike 1. Sharper. Strike 2. Strike 3. By strike 8, his arms felt slightly warm. By strike 10, he exhaled deeper than expected. Done, Seraphine nodded. That is all? For today. Kalen returned to his chambers confused. 10 strikes had been easy. Too easy. But the next morning, he found himself arriving slightly earlier. This time, he struck cleaner. More controlled. Something subtle shifted. Not dramatic. Not heroic. But noticeable. By the 7th day, Kalen began counting silently. By the 10th day, he felt irritation when a strike lacked precision. Again, he muttered to himself before Seraphine could speak. On the 12th day, the king secretly observed from a hidden balcony. He expected theatrics. Instead, he saw focus. Small. Quiet. But real. One evening, Kalen approached Seraphine after training. Why does it feel different? The prince asked cautiously. Because you are not fighting the dummy, Seraphine replied. Then what am I fighting? Impatience. Kalen looked down at his hands. They burn. Good. Why? Because growth always feels like loss at first. Loss of what? Comfort. Kalen stood silent. For the first time in his life, he felt something unfamiliar. Not boredom. Not anger. Not pleasure. But curiosity. And somewhere deep within him, a faint spark of hunger. The palace servants began whispering. Not loudly. Not boldly. But enough. The prince rises before the sun now. He dismissed the musicians early. I saw him refuse sweet wine. Change in a kingdom is rarely loud at first. It begins like frost forming silently over grass. Prince Kalen did not notice the whispers. But he did notice something else. The 10 strikes were no longer enough. On the 15th morning, after the 10th strike, he remained still. The blade hovered in his grip. Seraphine stood behind him, hands folded into his sleeves. You are finished, the Ashen said calmly. Kalen did not lower the sword. I want one more. Seraphine's voice was steady. That was not our agreement. I know. Then why do you want more? Kalen hesitated. The answer felt foolish. Because the 10th one was imperfect. Seraphine stepped forward, examining the dummy's sliced surface. It was acceptable. I do not want acceptable, Kalen replied quietly. Silence passed between them. Then tomorrow, Seraphine said, you may earn 11. The prince lowered the blade. Earn? Yes. How? By wanting it when no one watches. The next morning, Kalen arrived before Seraphine. He began alone. Strike 1. Strike 2. By strike 10, sweat clung lightly to his temples. He paused. Looked around. No audience. No applause. He could stop. Instead, strike 11. When Seraphine entered the courtyard, he said nothing. But he saw. Days passed. 11 became 12. 12 became 15. Yet Seraphine never ordered it. He simply allowed desire to grow naturally. One evening, as dusk painted the sky crimson, Kalen spoke. You tricked me. Seraphine's lips curved faintly. How? You told me I could keep my comforts. You told me you were not here to teach. I am not teaching, Seraphine replied. You are discovering. Kalen paced slowly. Why did none of the other masters succeed? Because they tried to push you. And you? I waited. For what? For you to feel the difference between pleasure and pride. Kalen stopped walking. Pleasure fades, Seraphine continued softly. Pride builds. The words lingered deep. That night, Kalen returned to his chambers. The dancers had been restored weeks ago by the king, believing progress required reward. They bowed as he entered. "My prince," one smiled. "Shall we begin?" Kalen looked at them differently now. Not with disdain. Not with indulgence. But with awareness. "Later," he said gently. "I am not finished with something." He removed his silk outer robe and practiced forms alone by candlelight. Each movement slower. Sharper. Intentional. For the first time, exhaustion felt earned. The following week, King Darius summoned Seraphine privately. "You have changed him," the king said. "No," Seraphine replied calmly. "He changed himself." Darius folded his arms. "Will this last?" Seraphine's eyes were steady. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you mistake growth for completion." The king frowned. "He is improving." "Yes," Seraphine nodded. "But improvement is fragile." Meanwhile, Kalen's body began to transform. His shoulders hardened. His stance widened. His breath deepened. But something else changed too. His temper shortened less often. His focus lingered longer. One afternoon, during practice, Seraphine tossed him a heavier blade without warning. Kalen barely caught it. "This is not mine," the prince said. "It is now. It is too heavy." Seraphine tilted his head slightly. "Is it?" Kalen lifted it again. His wrists trembled. "It slows me." "Good. Why good?" "Speed without control is waste." Kalen attempted his first strike. The blade dragged. Frustration flared. "I cannot move like before." Seraphine's voice remained calm. "Then stop trying to move like before." The prince froze. "Strength is not adding," Seraphine continued. "It is adapting." The next strike was clumsy. The next uneven. By the fifth, Kalen's jaw clenched. By the seventh, sweat poured freely. On the 10th, he dropped the blade. Breathing hard, anger rising, he snapped. "This is impossible." Seraphine did not react. "No," he said quietly. "It is uncomfortable." Kalen's chest heaved. The words struck deeper than the blade ever could. Uncomfortable. Not impossible. He stared at the heavy sword on the ground. His enemy was not steel. It was resistance. Slowly, he picked it up again. By the time winter brushed its cold fingers against the towers of Velmora, Prince Kalen no longer resembled the boy who once slept past noon. But transformation is not a straight road. It is a battlefield. And not all battles are fought with steel. The heavy blade had become his daily companion. At first, Kalen trained with it reluctantly. Each swing burned. Each movement drained him faster than before. His muscles ached long after sunset. His palms blistered. His shoulders throbbed. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, he stormed back to his chambers and slammed the sword against the wall. "This is pointless," he muttered. His old silk cushions were still there. His wine still waited. His musicians still bowed when summoned. Nothing was stopping him from returning to ease. Nothing, except the new voice growing inside him. He stared at the goblet on the table. Just one night of indulgence, he thought. "You've earned it." He reached for it. Paused. Seraphine's words echoed in his mind. "Luxury should obey you, not command you." Kalen withdrew his hand slowly. "Why does this feel like war?" he wondered. Because it was. The next morning, Seraphine arrived to find the prince already training, aggressively. The strikes were powerful. But wild. "You are angry," Seraphine observed. "I am tired," Kalen snapped. "Tired of effort?" "Tired of fighting myself." Seraphine nodded slowly. "Good." Kalen glared. "You call this good?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because now you see the enemy." The prince lowered the blade slightly. "I thought my weakness was laziness." "No," Seraphine said calmly. Laziness is only a symptom. Of what? Of comfort ruling your decisions. Kalen wiped sweat from his brow. So what am I fighting? Impulse, Seraphine replied. The desire to escape discomfort immediately. Kalen breathed heavily. And how do I defeat it? You don't. The prince blinked. You discipline it. Days later, Seraphine introduced something new. No swords. No dummies. Just stillness. Sit, Seraphine instructed in the courtyard. Kalen frowned. For what purpose? To watch your mind. That sounds useless. That is why it is difficult. Reluctantly, the prince sat cross-legged on the cold stone. At first, silence felt easy. Then boredom crept in. Then irritation. Then thoughts. Why am I doing this? I could be training. I could be resting. This is wasting time. His legs grew numb. His back stiffened. His mind screamed for movement. He opened one eye. Seraphine stood unmoving. How long? Kalen muttered. As long as it takes for you to notice. Notice what? That you are not your thoughts. The words confused him. But he closed his eyes again. Minutes felt like hours. Thought after thought pulled at him. Get up. Enough. This is stupid. For the first time, he did not obey them. He simply watched. They rose. They faded. Another came. Then faded. Something subtle shifted. The thoughts were loud. But he did not have to follow them. When he finally opened his eyes, the sun had moved significantly. His legs trembled when he stood. What was that? He asked. Control, Seraphine replied. I did nothing. Exactly. Meanwhile, King Darius observed everything from a distance. He expected dramatic change, heroic speeches, visible breakthroughs. Instead, what he saw puzzled him. Small improvements. Quiet habits. Long silences. One night, unable to resist, he approached his son privately. Kalen stood by the balcony, overlooking the sleeping city. You seem different, the king said. Kalen didn't turn. I feel different. In what way? The prince hesitated. I still want comfort, he admitted. But I no longer trust that desire. Darius studied him carefully. And what do you trust? Kalen turned slowly. My effort. The king felt something stir in his chest, something like pride. But Seraphine's warning echoed in his mind. Improvement is fragile. Weeks later, a new test arrived unexpectedly. During a public training exhibition, Kalen was asked to spar against Captain Aldrin, a seasoned warrior of the Royal Guard. The courtyard filled with nobles and citizens. Whispers spread quickly. Will the prince embarrass himself? Has he truly changed? Kalen stepped into the ring with steady breath. Captain Aldrin bowed respectfully. Steel clashed. The first exchange shocked the crowd. Kalen moved with controlled power. Not reckless. Not flashy. Focused. Yet midway through the match, Aldrin shifted tactics. Aggressive, relentless pressure. Kalen stumbled. Old frustration surged. The crowd gasped. A single mistake. A blade at his throat. The match ended. Silence filled the courtyard. Months ago, Kalen would have stormed off in humiliation. Instead, he lowered his weapon, bowed, and said clearly, Again. Captain Aldrin raised an eyebrow. Again? He asked. Yes. They resumed. This time, Kalen adapted. He lost again. But narrower. He bowed once more. Tomorrow, he said calmly. As the crowd dispersed, murmurs followed him. Not mockery. Respect. That night, Seraphine approached him. You lost. Yes. How do you feel? Kalen considered. Hungry. Seraphine smiled faintly. Good. Because the greatest war was never against Aldrin. It was against the voice that once whispered. Quit. And for the first time in his life, Kalen did not listen. Growth is quiet. But comfort is loud. And when comfort realizes it is losing control, it does not leave peacefully. Winter deepened across Velmora. Frost clung to the stone corridors. The palace fires burned longer. The nights stretched heavier. Prince Kalen's training intensified. More weight. Longer sessions. Harder sparring. But something else increased too. Fatigue. Not the kind that strengthens. The kind that whispers. One evening, after losing again to Captain Aldrin, this time by the smallest margin yet, Kalen returned to his chambers slower than usual. His muscles were sore beyond pride. His hands trembled when he removed his gauntlets. He stared at himself in the mirror. Stronger. Sharper. But exhausted. A servant approached cautiously. "My prince, the musicians await." Kalen hesitated. For months, he had limited indulgence. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt deserved. "Let them enter," he said quietly. The music began, soft, nostalgic melodies from his childhood. Warm light. Sweet wine. Gentle laughter. His body relaxed instantly. Relief washed over him like rain after drought. And with it came the old voice. "See? This is who you are. This is easier. You don't need the struggle." He leaned back into the cushions. Just one night, he told himself. Just one. The next morning, Kalen woke late. The sun had already climbed. His body felt heavier than usual. He rushed to the courtyard. Seraphine stood waiting. "You are late," the Ashen said calmly. "I needed rest." Seraphine studied him carefully. "Did you?" Kalen avoided his gaze. They trained. But something was off. His strikes lacked precision. His breathing was shallow. His focus scattered. After the 10th exchange, Seraphine lowered his staff. "What did you feed last night?" he asked. Kalen frowned. "What do you mean?" "You fed something. I can see it." Silence. Then Kalen snapped defensively. "I am allowed to enjoy my life." "Yes," Seraphine agreed calmly. "But enjoyment should not weaken you." "It didn't." Seraphine stepped closer. "Then why do you feel slower?" Kalen clenched his jaw. "Because it's true," he thought. Seraphine's voice softened. "Comfort is not your enemy." "Then what is?" "Unconscious comfort." That evening, Seraphine introduced a new test. "No training tomorrow," he said. Kalen blinked. "Why?" "You will spend the entire day doing nothing." The prince almost laughed. "That sounds easy." Seraphine met his eyes. "Without music. Without wine. Without books. Without conversation." Kalen's smile faded. "You will sit in your chamber," Seraphine continued, "and face whatever arises." "This is pointless." "Is it?" The next day felt endless. Morning passed slowly. Kalen paced. Saturday. Stood. Lay down. Sat again. His mind began attacking him. "You're wasting time. You're falling behind. Others are improving. You deserve comfort." Hours stretched painfully. By afternoon, irritation became anger. By evening, anger became restlessness. He nearly summoned the musicians 3 separate times. Each time, he stopped. Why is this harder than sword practice? He wondered. Because the body obeys quickly. The mind resists quietly. When night finally fell, he felt drained, despite doing nothing. Seraphine entered silently. "What did you discover?" he asked. Kalen spoke slowly. "I thought I trained my body. And I see now I only distracted my mind." Seraphine nodded. "Your greatest opponent does not shout. It persuades," Kalen whispered. Days later, the real test arrived. News came from the northern border. A small rebellion. Nothing catastrophic. But serious enough to require royal presence. King Darius summoned his son. "It is time," the king said. Kalen felt a flicker of doubt. "I am not ready." "You will never feel ready," Darius replied. Seraphine stood beside them, silent. "You will not command," the king continued. "You will observe. You will stand beside General Varick." Kalen nodded. As he prepared for departure, old fears crept in. What if I fail? What if I freeze? What if all this training was illusion? Seraphine approached him privately before he mounted his horse. "Remember," the Ashen said, "fear is comfort in disguise." Kalen frowned. "How?" "Fear asks you to retreat to safety. And if I feel it, you will. And then? Move forward anyway." As the army rode north under gray skies, Kalen felt something different. Not laziness. Not indulgence. But tension. Real responsibility. Real consequence. No applause. No training ground. Only reality. And deep within him, the war resumed. But this time, he did not look away. The northern winds did not welcome hesitation. They cut through armor. Through leather. Through thought. As Prince Kalen rode beside General Varick toward the frostbitten borderlands of Velmora, the world looked harsher than any courtyard had ever seemed. Villages lay quiet under pale skies. Smoke rose thin from chimneys. Farmers paused mid-task to watch the royal banner pass. This was not a practice field. This was consequence. Varick, scarred and broad-shouldered, studied the prince from the corner of his eye. "You've trained," the general said bluntly. "Yes. Training ends here." Kalen nodded slowly. He understood what that meant. The rebellion was small, a faction of border soldiers refusing tax levies after a harsh winter. Angry. Cold. Desperate. But desperation sharpened steel. The royal camp settled near a frozen river. Tents snapped in the wind. Soldiers murmured quietly around low fires. That night, Kalen could not sleep. The battlefield had not yet begun, but his mind had. What if I freeze? What if I hesitate? What if I embarrass my father? His heart beat faster under the furs. Then he remembered the stillness practice. He sat upright. Closed his eyes. Watched. The thoughts surged like a storm. But this time, he did not chase them. He observed them. Fear rose. Fear fell. Doubt whispered. Doubt faded. He exhaled slowly. The enemy inside him was loud. But it was not in control. At dawn, negotiations failed. The rebel captain, a former Velmoran officer named Rethan, stood across the icy clearing, armored and defiant. "We will not kneel to distant comfort," Rethan shouted. "You feast while we starve." Kalen felt the sting of truth in the words. Months ago, that accusation would have been undeniable. General Varick leaned close. "You will stand beside me. You will not rush. You will not react without command." Kalen nodded. Steel was drawn. The clash erupted quickly, sharp, chaotic, real. Kalen's first instinct was panic. The sounds were different than training. Metal screamed. Men shouted. Snow stained red. A rebel charged toward Varick's flank. Kalen saw it a heartbeat too late. "Move," the mind whispered. "Too dangerous," another voice countered. "You might fail. You might die." For a fraction of a second, the old Kalen hesitated. Comfort disguised as caution. Fear dressed as logic. Then Seraphine's voice echoed within him. "Move forward anyway." Kalen stepped. Blade met blade. The impact jolted his bones. The rebel soldier was strong, wild with anger. But Kalen did not match his chaos. He remembered the heavy blade. Control. Adapt. The exchange was brief but fierce. Kalen disarmed him, pressing steel to his throat. The soldier froze. Breathing hard, Kalen spoke clearly. "Surrender. Not rage. Not pride. Steady command." The soldier dropped his weapon. Across the field, Varric noticed. And nodded once. The battle did not last long. The rebellion fractured under organized resistance. Several surrendered. A few fled. By midday, silence returned to the snow. Kalen stood still, chest rising and falling. His hands trembled. Not from weakness. From realization. He had acted. Not perfectly. But decisively. Later, as captives were secured, Rethan was brought before Kalen and Varric. "You are the spoiled prince." Rethan spat bitterly. Kalen met his eyes calmly. "I was." Rethan blinked. Silence stretched. Kalen continued. "Your anger is heard. But rebellion weakens the kingdom that feeds your families." "You do not understand hunger," Rethan snapped. "No," Kalen admitted. "But I understand discipline." Varric looked at him sharply. Kalen turned to the general. "Reduce the levies this season. Send grain from the southern reserves." Varric studied him. "That is your decision?" "Yes." Rethan's expression shifted, confusion replacing fury. Strength did not always mean punishment. Sometimes it meant restraint. That night, as the royal camp prepared to return south, Varric approached the prince quietly. "You hesitated," the general said. Kalen did not deny it. "Yes." "But you moved." "Yes." Varric crossed his arms. "Why?" Kalen looked toward the dark horizon. "Because fear was louder than reason. And I chose reason." Varric's stern face softened slightly. "That is command." When they returned to Velmora, King Darius awaited them at the palace gates. He did not ask for reports. He looked only at his son. "You stood your ground?" the king asked. Kalen held his father's gaze. "Yes." Darius nodded once. That was enough. Later that evening, Kalen found Seraphine alone in the courtyard. Snow drifted gently around them. "I understand now," Kalen said quietly. "Understand what?" Seraphine asked. "The battlefield was never the north." Seraphine's eyes reflected the torchlight. "No." Kalen exhaled slowly. "It was here," he said, touching his chest. Seraphine nodded. "The outer war reveals the inner one." Kalen looked up at the dark sky. "I still feel fear." "You always will." "And comfort still tempts me." "It always will." Kalen frowned slightly. "Then does the war ever end?" Seraphine's voice was calm as winter air. "No." A pause. "But you are no longer losing." Spring returned to Velmora slowly. Snow melted from the towers. Rivers swelled with thawed water. The kingdom breathed again. And with it came a quiet shift no one could ignore. King Darius had begun walking with a cane. It was subtle at first. A slight delay when rising. A heavier exhale after stairs. Longer silences during council. The kingdom noticed. And so did Kalen. One evening, the king summoned his son to the throne hall, not for reprimand, not for instruction, but for conversation. The hall was empty. No guards. No ministers. No ceremony. Just father and son. "You rode north," Darius began. "You faced steel. You made judgment." "Yes." "And you returned steadier than you left." Kalen did not smile. "I returned more aware." The king studied him carefully. "When I was your age," Darius said, "I believed strength meant domination." Kalen listened. "I conquered lands," the king continued, "but I never conquered myself. I mistook aggression for authority." A long silence filled the hall. "I do not want that for you," Darius said quietly. Kalen stepped closer. "You fear I will become weak." "No," the king replied softly. "I fear you will become careless." The word lingered. Careless. Not lazy. Not spoiled. Careless. Strength without awareness. Power without discipline. Authority without self-mastery. The king rose slowly and stepped down from the throne. For 1 week, he said, you will sit here. Kalen's chest tightened. Alone? Yes. You will hear petitions. You will make minor judgments. I will not interfere. Kalen hesitated. The battlefield had been clearer. Steel was honest. Leadership was not. But he nodded. The first day felt unnatural. The throne was heavier than armor. Petitions came, farmers disputing land boundaries, merchants arguing tariffs, a widow seeking justice against a corrupt official. No swords. No blood. But every word carried consequence. At first, Kalen felt overwhelmed. He wanted quick answers. Easy resolutions. But something within him slowed that impulse. Watch. Observe. Do not react. He listened fully before speaking. Asked questions instead of assuming. Delayed judgment when unsure. By the third day, something shifted. He no longer felt like a prince pretending. He felt responsible. On the 5th day, a wealthy noble attempted to manipulate a ruling with veiled threats and promises. Old Kalen would have avoided confrontation. New Kalen held his gaze. The law does not bend for comfort, Kalen said evenly. The noble left displeased. But the court murmured with approval. At the end of the week, King Darius returned to the throne hall. He did not sit. Instead, he stood before his son. What did you learn? The king asked. Kalen thought carefully before answering. That ruling others is easier than ruling myself. Darius raised a brow. Explain. When anger rises, I want to react. When fear rises, I want to retreat. When praise comes, I want to indulge. He paused. But the throne demands none of those. The king's eyes softened. And what does it demand? Control. A long silence. Then King Darius removed the golden circlet from his own head. Not fully. Just enough to hold it in his hands. This crown, he said quietly, is not heavy because of gold. Kalen watched closely. It is heavy because it amplifies whatever sits beneath it. He stepped forward and placed the crown briefly on Kalen's head. If a careless man wears it, the kingdom suffers. The weight surprised him. It pressed down not just on his skull, but on his awareness. If a disciplined man wears it, Darius continued, the kingdom thrives. The crown was removed. Not yet permanent, but inevitable. That evening, Kalen found Seraphine one final time in the courtyard. The ashen stood beneath blooming cedar branches. My father tested me, Kalen said. Seraphine nodded. And? I passed. A faint smile touched the ashen's lips. For now. Kalen exhaled. The war truly never ends, does it? Seraphine's eyes reflected the setting sun. No. But I see it now, Kalen said quietly. The voice that wants ease. The voice that fears discomfort. The voice that seeks applause. He placed a hand over his chest. And I see that I am not that voice. Seraphine stepped closer. Then you are ready. For the throne? No. Kalen frowned. For yourself? Years later, when King Darius finally passed the crown fully to his son, the ceremony was grand. Banners soared. Trumpets echoed. Citizens filled the streets. But Kalen felt none of the old rush of indulgence. No hunger for applause. No craving for validation. He felt steady. When the crown settled permanently upon his head, he did not think of power. He thought of discipline. He thought of the heavy blade. The silent chamber. The frozen battlefield. The restless mind. He understood something now that no sword master had ever taught him. The greatest kingdom is not land. It is the mind. And most people lose it daily to comfort. That night, after the celebrations ended, King Kalen stood alone on the balcony overlooking Velmora. The city lights flickered like stars. A quiet voice rose within him. Rest. Indulge. You deserve it. He smiled faintly. I will, he whispered. But on my terms. And he turned away from the balcony. Not because comfort was evil, but because it no longer ruled him.